All right, diving deep today into the world of the Atlantic sturgeon. Got some amazing research articles here, ready to unlock some secrets.
Secrets of this ancient fish.
Ancient fish. You might be surprised to learn these guys been around for millions of years,
Oh, yeah.
swimming alongside dinosaurs.
Absolutely. It's true, like swimming fossils, really.
In fact, they kind of look a bit prehistoric themselves with those bony plates instead of scales.
And that's not just, a cool fact. By studying them, we can actually learn a lot about how ecosystems have changed over time. Imagine the things they've witnessed.
Okay, so they've seen a lot, but what exactly makes them so unique? I mean, besides looking like they swam out of a Jurassic Park movie.
Well, for starters, they're anadromous,
Anadromous.
which means they live in the ocean but migrate up freshwater rivers to spawn.
Oh, wow.
And get this, they can grow up to 14 feet long.
14 feet.
That's longer than most cars.
Wow, that's a serious roadblock in the river.
Mm.
So they're huge, they're ancient, and they make these epic journeys. But what's the deal with that shovel-shaped snout they have?
That snout, well, it's perfectly adapted for finding food on the riverbed.
Okay.
It's covered in sensory barbels that help them locate things like invertebrates, small fish, crustaceans.
Oh, cool.
Think of it like a metal detector, but for tasty treats.
Ah, so they're basically rooting around in the mud for dinner.
Yep.
Makes sense. But speaking of food, I know there's a connection between sturgeon and something a little more, shall we say, luxurious.
Oh, yes.
Caviar. What can you tell us about that?
Right, caviar. It's actually the sturgeon's eggs roe.
Okay.
And historically, the high demand for this delicacy led to some serious overfishing.
Really?
It got so bad that many Atlantic sturgeon populations were pushed to the brink of extinction.
So this love of caviar almost wiped them out. That's pretty intense. Is that the only reason they're struggling?
Unfortunately, no. They face a whole cocktail of threats, from habitat destruction and pollution to dams blocking their access to spawning grounds.
Oh, geez.
It's like someone keeps moving the finish line of their migration marathon.
And on top of all that, I imagine climate change is throwing another wrench into things.
You got it. Rising sea levels and changing water temperatures are adding yet another layer of complexity to their already challenging lives. Imagine trying to run a marathon while the course keeps changing and the weather's going haywire.
That sounds incredibly stressful. So are there any bright spots in this story? What's being done to protect these ancient giants?
Well, there is some good news. Many areas have implemented fishing bans and habitat restoration projects.
That's great.
There's also a push to modify or remove those dams that are blocking their migration routes. It's like finally giving those marathon runners a clear path.
That's a great start. But I imagined saving a species as unique and ancient as the Atlantic sturgeon requires a pretty deep understanding of their needs. What role does research play in all this?
Research is absolutely crucial. Scientists are working hard to unravel the mysteries of sturgeon behavior, migration patterns, and even their genetics. The more we understand, the better we can tailor our conservation efforts to give them the best chance of survival.
So it's like putting together a giant puzzle to figure out how to best protect them. Are there any surprising discoveries that researchers have made recently?
One of the coolest things is the use of acoustic telemetry, which involves implanting tiny transmitters in the sturgeon and tracking their movements. It's basically like giving them a little GPS tag so we can follow their epic journeys and identify the most crucial habitats to protect.
That's pretty high tech for a fish that's been around for millions of years. So we're learning more about their lives, working to restore their habitats, and even helping them navigate their way home. But why should the average person care about all of this? It's not like we're all out there fishing for sturgeon or indulging in caviar.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. The Atlantic sturgeon is what we call an indicator species. That means their health directly reflects the health of the entire ecosystem they live in.
So if the sturgeons are struggling, it's a sign that something's wrong with the whole river system.
Exactly. Think of it this way. A doctor checks your vital signs to get a sense of your overall health, right? The Atlantic sturgeon is like a vital sign for the whole ecosystem. By protecting them, we're essentially protecting the health of the entire river, all the other species that live there, and ultimately ourselves.
That's a pretty powerful connection. So saving the sturgeon isn't just about saving one species. It's about protecting the health of the entire ecosystem for everyone.
Precisely. And there's another layer to this story that I think is equally fascinating, the human element.
You mean the people whose lives are intertwined with the fate of the Atlantic sturgeon? That sounds like a great place to pick up in the next part of our deep dive. But before we do, what's one key takeaway you think our listeners should remember from this part of our conversation?
I'd say the most important thing to remember is that the Atlantic sturgeon is much more than just a fish. It's a living time capsule, a vital sign for our rivers, and a symbol of the interconnectedness of all life on Earth. Protecting them is about protecting ourselves and ensuring a healthy future for generations to come.
It's easy to get lost in all the scientific details, but as we were saying before, there are real people out there whose lives are deeply connected to the Atlantic sturgeon. I'm curious to hear about their experiences.
That's a great point. It's easy to forget that conservation isn't just about data and research. It's about people, their livelihoods, and their cultural connections to the natural world.
So let's dive into those stories. Who are some of the people on the front lines of sturgeon conservation?
Well, one group that immediately comes to mind is the fishermen. Many have been fishing these waters for generations, and they've seen firsthand how sturgeon populations have declined over time.
I can only imagine how disheartening that must be to witness a species you've known your whole life slowly disappear.
It's definitely a cause for concern. And for many fishermen, it's not just about the fish themselves. It's about their livelihood, their heritage, their connection to the water.
It's like a whole way of life is being threatened. So how are these fishermen responding to this crisis? Are they just accepting it?
Actually, many of them have become advocates for conservation. They're working with scientists, sharing their knowledge of the sturgeon's behavior and habitat, and supporting efforts to restore populations.
Wow, so they're turning their concern into action. That's pretty inspiring. What about the scientists who are studying these fish? What are they doing to help?
Well, scientists are working tirelessly to unravel the mysteries of the Atlantic sturgeon. They're like detectives piecing together clues about the sturgeon's life cycle, their migration patterns, their genetic diversity.
Oh, yeah.
It's fascinating work, and it's crucial for informing conservation efforts.
It sounds like they're facing a pretty big challenge. What are some of the biggest hurdles they have to overcome in their research?
One of the biggest challenges is that sturgeon are long-lived and slow-growing. This means it takes a long time to gather data on their populations and to see the effects of conservation efforts. Patience is definitely a virtue in sturgeon research.
So it's a long game. But I imagine there are also some exciting breakthroughs happening in the field. What are some of the new tools and techniques that scientists are using to study sturgeon?
One of the most exciting advancements is the use of acoustic telemetry. This involves implanting small transmitters in the sturgeon and using receivers placed throughout their habitat to track their movements. It's like giving them a little GPS tracker.
So we can literally follow their underwater journeys. That's amazing. What kind of information are scientists gathering with this technology?
Well, it's providing valuable insights into their migration patterns, their habitat use, and how they respond to changes in their environment. This data is essential for making informed decisions about conservation strategies.
Okay, so we've talked about the fishermen and the scientists, but what about us, the everyday people? What could we do to help protect these ancient fish?
There's actually a lot that individuals can do to contribute to sturgeon conservation. First and foremost, we need to spread awareness about the plight of the Atlantic sturgeon. Talk to your friends and family, share information on social media, and support organizations that are working to protect them.
It sounds like you're saying that even just talking about them can make a difference. What else can people do besides raising awareness?
Another important step is to make sustainable choices in our daily lives. For example, we can reduce our consumption of seafood that might be caught using methods that harm sturgeon, like bottom trawling. We can also be mindful about where our caviar comes from if we choose to consume it at all, making sure it's sourced sustainably.
So being responsible consumers is key. What about those of us who want to get more actively involved? Are there any opportunities to volunteer or donate to sturgeon conservation efforts?
Absolutely. Many conservation organizations rely on volunteers to help with habitat restoration projects, water quality monitoring, and educational outreach. You can also donate to organizations that are dedicated to sturgeon research and conservation.
Okay, so we can volunteer, donate, spread the word, and be mindful consumers. It sounds like there are a lot of ways to make a difference, even if we don't live right on the river where they live.
Exactly. Even small actions can add up to a big impact. Now, I know we've talked a lot about the challenges facing the Atlantic sturgeon, but let's not forget to appreciate just how incredible these creatures truly are.
Yes, let's take a moment to celebrate the sturgeon. They are fascinating creatures. One thing that really struck me is just how long they live. 60 years is a pretty long time for a fish. What contributes to their impressive longevity?
Well, one factor is their slow metabolism. They're not like those high-energy fish that are constantly on the move. They take their time conserving energy, which may contribute to their long lifespan.
So they're the laid-back elders of the underwater world. What else helps them live so long?
They're also incredibly adaptable and can withstand a wide range of environmental conditions. They can tolerate fluctuations in temperature, salinity, and even oxygen levels, which is pretty impressive.
Talk about resilience. They've clearly got some serious survival skills.
They do, and that resilience is a testament to their evolutionary history. Think about it. They've survived multiple ice ages, mass extinctions, and countless other environmental upheavals over millions of years.
Wow, it's mind-boggling to think about all the changes they've witnessed.
It is, and it makes their current plight even more concerning. These ancient fish, which have survived so much, are now facing an unprecedented threat from human activities.
It's a stark reminder that we have a responsibility to protect these living fossils. So besides their longevity, what else makes them so fascinating?
Their epic migration is another mind-blowing aspect of their life history. They travel hundreds, sometimes even thousands of miles from the ocean to their freshwater spawning grounds.
And they do all of this without a map or a compass. How do they even find their way?
Scientists believe they use a combination of cues, such as the Earth's magnetic field, the sun's position, and even their sense of smell, to navigate these incredible journeys. It's like an internal GPS system.
That's incredible. And what's even more amazing is that they often return to the same river where they were born to spawn. It's like a homecoming.
It is. And this fidelity to their natal rivers highlights the importance of protecting those habitats. If those rivers are altered or destroyed, the sturgeon lose their connection to their birthplace, and it disrupts their natural cycle.
It really emphasizes just how interconnected everything is.
Yeah.
Sturgeon, the rivers, the whole ecosystem.
Exactly. Protecting the sturgeon isn't just about saving one species, it's about protecting the entire web of life that they're a part of.
You know, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the science to the human stories to the amazing adaptations of the Atlantic sturgeon. But I feel like we'd be missing a big part of the story if we didn't talk about their cultural significance.
You're absolutely right. These fish have played an important role in human history and culture for centuries. They've been a source of food, a symbol of strength and resilience, and even a subject of mythology and folklore.
That's fascinating. I'd love to hear more about those cultural connections. What are some examples of how the sturgeon has been depicted in art, literature, or even music?
Well, in many Native American cultures along the Atlantic coast, the sturgeon was often revered as a sacred animal. It was seen as a symbol of abundance, prosperity, and long life.
It's amazing how different cultures have interpreted and interacted with the sturgeon throughout history. I imagine those cultural connections add another layer of complexity to conservation efforts.
You're exactly right. Conservation efforts need to be sensitive to the cultural values and beliefs of the people who live alongside these fish. It's not just about science, it's about understanding and respecting the cultural significance of these creatures.
So it's about finding solutions that work for both people and nature, acknowledging the interconnectedness of culture and conservation.
Exactly. It's a reminder that conservation is not just a scientific endeavor, it's a human one as well.
That's a great point. Now, I know we've touched on the various threats facing the Atlantic sturgeon, but I'd like to delve a bit deeper into those challenges, especially in the context of a rapidly changing world.
That sounds like a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive, where we'll explore the future of sturgeon conservation and discuss what steps we can take to ensure the survival of this magnificent creature.
You got it. But before we move on, what's one thing you hope our listener takes away from this part of our conversation?
I hope our listener realizes that the Atlantic sturgeon is more than just a fascinating creature with a cool backstory. Its fate is intertwined with our own, and understanding its story can teach us valuable lessons about resilience, interconnectedness, and the importance of protecting our natural world.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of the Atlantic sturgeon. We've explored their incredible journey, the challenges they face, and the inspiring efforts to protect them. But now I'm curious, what does the future hold for these ancient giants? Is there hope for their survival?
Oh, there's definitely reason for optimism. While the Atlantic sturgeon still faces, significant threats, we're seeing a surge in conservation efforts and a growing awareness of their importance.